Hey everyone, Morgan here. So today I'm going to talk about some of the top ways to preserve food for long-term storage, and I'm sorry if that window is very distracting there. So in addition to the ways that to preserve food for long-term storage and how to properly do it, I do want to first mention properly storing it. Now, when I say properly storing it, a lot of people, they may live in really hot conditions and they don't have temperature controlled areas. Like a lot of people don't live with AC. A lot of people, live in hot areas and they can't have, a super controlled, perfect 70-degree, temperature all the time. I mean, even when we did have AC, it was never at 70 degrees. It was at least 80 degrees because we're Southerners and that's cold to us. Anyway, my point is we need to look at our situation. So, I have a blog post down below that talks all about how to store food if you do not have AC or a temperature controlled area. So go down to that blog post and read that. Sure, it's ideal, and in a perfect world, we would all perfectly store our food, right? But there are lots of ways to store it that could help extend the shelf life for a long period of time. So if you can store it in a good temperature-controlled area, like around 70 to 75 degrees or lower, that's usually ideal. If you have a basement or a cold storage or anything like that, that's ideal if you have that, okay? If you don't, just work with what you got. Cover things with blankets, put them in coolers, insulate them with blankets or other things, insulate your shed or garage or insulate whatever, insulate little totes, whatever. Anyway, I had that blog post that goes all into that. So first of all, ways to preserve food. First, dehydrating. So these are a whole bunch of dehydrated apples I did a while ago. Love dehydrating. Dehydrating is the best. I love it. If I could dehydrate everything, which you can dehydrate most things. I actually have a blog post about the top foods that you should dehydrate down below in the description, so check that out. So dehydrating is great. Highly recommend dehydrating. Either get a dehydrator or you could make a solar dehydrator, which I've done, and I have, and that's how I dehydrated these. And so do that. So dehydrating is really good. Canning's a really good one. Pressure canning or water bath canning. Now, there are different foods will do different things. So, you'll water bath certain foods. You will pressure can other foods. And then there's also fermenting, which you would normally do in cans. And then, there's there's making jellies and jams and, making all sorts of preserves and syrups and all these sorts of things with our food in order to kind of extend it and make it last, and think about different ways that we can use our food and preserve it and eat it and all these kinds of things. But canning is always good. I know this stuff is kind of in short supply lately. So you may want to look into other options such as, dehydrating or storing what you can in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, okay? Mylar bags are good for most dried foods. If a dried food item has a high content of oil, it's probably not going to be good to be stored for super long term or even really, for more than a few months in a Mylar bag, even with an oxygen absorber. It's because of those oils, it could really make it go rancid pretty quickly. But I love Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers. I think that's a great way to preserve food for a longer period of times. Dried goods, of course, that's what we're talking about here. Even your dehydrated stuff, I would throw in a Mylar bag. We're eating these, so it's not in a Mylar bag, but even your dehydrated stuff, throw it in a Mylar bag with an oxygen absorber. I prefer to do that over putting it in a jar with an oxygen absorber. I feel that this keeps the light out a little bit better than this. But if you're keeping this in a cool, dark place, dark place, like your basement or something like that, it doesn't get a lot of direct sunlight, then it's cool. Put it in a jar. The dried goods, your dehydrated goods, or whatever, right? That's cool. Put it in a jar. I personally prefer the Mylar bags. They're a little bit easier for me, and I think that they're cheaper than storing in jars. Now, one thing I do want to talk about real quick is dry canning. I'm not a fan of dry canning. I've heard more horror stories with dry canning than anything. I don't think dry canning is an actual canning method. Lots of people do it. I know it, but it's not technically canning. And unfortunately, what's happening is you're heating it up so that you have that kind of vacuum seal, so that you're kind of canning it and sealing it, right? But there's no guarantee that you're preserving anything in here. I would say it's almost as good as me just taking this and closing it up and preserving it like that. Okay, it's just kind of almost the same concept. And I'm going to have a ton of people arguing with me. I do not dry can. I will never dry can. I don't agree with dry canning. If you want to dry can, more power to you. Make sure that if you do dry can, to watch out for that condensation, because it will most likely happen. It's happened to most people who dry can, because it's not getting rid of that moisture. Even if you put like a silica packet or an oxygen absorber in there, along with, canning it in the oven, canning it in the oven, you're still not getting rid of everything, okay? It's not like water bath or pressure canning or anything like that, in which you're actually sealing it and canning it. You're actually sealing it. I mean, that's the whole process of that. So dry canning, I don't recommend it, but if you do it, just make sure that you're keeping a very, very close eye and making sure that you are looking for any moisture or condensation that's building up inside. If you see that, immediately open it and just use the contents inside, because unfortunately it just didn't work out, okay? And the more that condensation or moisture stays in there, the worse your food is going to get. So just open that up and use it. Don't try to dry can it again. Don't try to, do anything else. Just open it up and use it, okay? A vacuum sealer, you would think, would take out the most air, more than an oxygen absorber in Mylar bag. However, an oxygen absorber in a Mylar bag actually takes out more oxygen than a vacuum sealer. But a vacuum sealer is good for preservation methods of, like putting it in your freezer, things like that. And moving on to the freezer, this is my freezer over here. I do keep a lot of things in my freezer. I do use my freezer as a preservation method. And a lot of people are going to tell me, but what about an EMP? But what about if the lights go out? There are solar options, and I will be talking about this very soon. In fact, my husband's going to be talking about this. Now, I already did a video about how we set up our freezer with the solar. That's down below. So if you are interested in that process about how we set up our freezer on solar, please check out that video down below. But I will tell you all about how to calculate needs for solar and all that to keep your freezer running. Also, you will want alternative energy needs. Outside of, solar. You may want like backup solars that are hidden in Faraday cages or something. Or you may also want to consider investing in EMP Shield. EMP Shield is something, I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but we're actually investing in that, and that should be here, whenever it gets here. But when it gets here, we'll be showing you the installation of that EMP Shield, and hopefully that'll protect our assets of solar and wind. We're getting wind here shortly as well. Yeah, I use my freezer as a preservation method. Lots of people do. I put so much in my freezer to preserve that food and to use it later in everyday life. And I do plan to use it in emergency and disasters, especially with that EMP Shield company. And hopefully, that's going to keep everything rolling, but we also have backup energy options as well.
Of course, freeze drying is an option if you have the means to purchase a freeze dryer. It's absolutely one of the best ways to do it, especially if you can do it at home. That's just fantastic. So, definitely don't write it off. They have giveaways every 3 months or so. Enter to win a home freeze dryer. I had a friend recently who won one. So, hey, you never know. But enter their giveaways and maybe look into their layaway programs, save some money, see if you can get one of these yourself.
In saying all that, if you are ever planning on preserving off-grid, like you're ever planning on canning off grid, make sure that you have all the extra canning supplies needed, sugars, salts, for fermenting with sugars and salts, and, canning with sugars and salts and all the acidic acid and everything else that you might need for your canning, especially, extra lids for canning. That's always important. You may also want to consider looking into making a smoker or getting a smoker, and learning how to smoke meats specifically. You can smoke a lot of different types of foods to preserve it, but meats, specifically fish and meats, are really good to preserve through a smoker. We plan to be making like a primitive smoker here soon. but yeah, so that's another preservation method to think about as well. In the end, store your food in the best possible conditions that you can think of. Even if you can't store it at that ideal temperature of 70 to 75 degrees, store it in the very best conditions that you possibly can. Again, go to my links down below in the description to learn more about how to store if you can't have temperature controlled areas, and also about foods to dehydrate, as well as a whole bunch of things. I also have a whole article that goes into depth about Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers, so go check those out. Thank you all so much for watching. Head to links in my description, and don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter while you're at my website. Thank you all so much for watching. Conquer Tomorrow by Preparing Today. I'll talk to you later. Bye.